Hello Year 10 and welcome to how to get grades 6 to 9 on question 3 on paper 1 of the AQA language exam. Now we left you at the end of looking at questions 1 and 2 with this set of questions. How many things do you need to list from question 1? The answer is you need to list 4 things. True or false? We will have seen the extracts before the exam. False, we won't have seen them. How many marks is question 2 worth? It's worth 8 marks. Name one piece of subject terminology you could identify for the language question. Metaphor, simile, personification, onomatopoeia. And how many answers do you have to answer question 2? The answer is 12 minutes. If you've got all of those right, well done. So question 3, like question 2, is also worth 8 marks, and like question 2, you should only spend 12 minutes on answering it. However, I think this is often the more complicated question on the paper in part A. I've seen students actually spend 20 minutes on this question and only have about 10 minutes left on question 4. The problem with that is this is worth 8 marks, whereas question 4 is worth 20. Now, I'm not suggesting that you should miss a question out, far from it, but I would rather you were getting 5-6 marks on this question and more like 16 to 20 marks on question 4. Question 4 is worth 25% of your overall mark on this paper. So don't be fooled. Only spend 12 minutes on question 3, but it is difficult. Hopefully, by the end of this walkthrough, you'll understand how to do it correctly. Question 3. The one that you're only meant to spend 12 minutes on and is only worth 8 marks, but often students end up spending 20 minutes on it and therefore can't answer question 4 properly, which is worth 20 marks. So you need to be really clear what you've got to do here. Question 3 will always ask you to think about the whole of the source that you've been given, not specific extracts, not specific lines. And it will always ask you how the writer has used structure. Actually, the exam board isn't really interested in whether you are interested in the text or not. What they do want to know is, do you understand how the writer has developed the source? So in other words, structure is what happens in the text, when and why. So you have to be clear what happens at the beginning, how it's developed in the middle, and what goes on in the conclusion. The beginning, the middle, the end. And structural features you can look out for are obviously paragraphs, sentences, punctuation, and dialogue. But before we can even look at what goes on in the beginning, the middle, and the end, we've got to get you used to some key vocabulary. So, focus is what we are paying attention to at any point in the text. Shift is when something changes. Our focus may change from the weather to a particular person. The establishment, well, when you establish something, you do it at the beginning, the start, where we find things out. But then there's the development, what happens in the middle, and finally, conclusion, the ending, as I'm about to conclude what I'm saying on this bit now. Use these 5 terms throughout your writing on question 3. They are vital. So let's put this into practice with a story that you might possibly know, the story of the 3 little pigs. Once upon a time, there were 3 little pigs who lived in 3 little houses. They were very happy with their lives and enjoyed being best friends. One pig lived in a house made of straw, one made in a house made of sticks, and one in a house made of bricks. "Everything is perfect for us," cried the pigs. What could possibly go wrong? But one day, the big bad wolf came along. He was ravenous and determined to eat a big dinner. Pigs sounded delicious. He approached the first pig's house and huffed and puffed and blew the house down, gobbling the pig up in one go. He then went to the second pig's house and huffed and puffed and blew the house down, gobbling the second pig up. But then he reached the third pig's house. He huffed and puffed as much as he could, but he couldn't knock the house down. So the wolf came up with an idea. He would climb down the chimney, but the third pig was the smartest of them all. As the wolf came down the chimney, he fell into a cauldron of boiling water and was cooked alive. The third little pig turned him into a nice rug and lived happily ever after. So, there we have the complete story of the three little pigs. So let's look what happens in the establishment, the beginning, the first paragraph. Well, if we just summarise what happens, the three little pigs are introduced, they lived in three little houses and everything is perfect for them. That just summarises the story. But let's think, what's the focus on? Well, the focus is on the lives and background of the three little pigs. And at this point, the atmosphere is joyful and happy. However, it could foreshadow danger as everything seems a bit too perfect. So, what do we think as the reader? Well, will life always be perfect for the little pigs? And what could possibly go wrong? And that's the way we have to think about the beginning, the middle and the end. The establishment, the development and the conclusion. So, when you're reading your whole source, even if you just take the first paragraph, you have to establish what's going on. Summarise what's happening. What is the focus? What is the atmosphere? And what are two questions that the reader might have? Then, how does the story develop? Is there a shift in focus? Summarise that. What is the focus? What's the atmosphere like now? Is there two questions the reader might have here? And finally, take the last paragraph, even the last sentence. Summarise what happens, what's the focus now, what's the atmosphere like now, and two questions that the audience and reader might have. I'll show you on the next slide what I mean. Sentence starters are absolutely vital here to help you build each paragraph. So, by having sorted out what happens in the story and what the focus is on, we can write our paragraph up. And we start this way. In the establishment of the story, the focus is on the lives and backgrounds of the three little pigs. This is shown when the three little pigs are introduced. They lived in three little houses and everything is perfect for them. At this point, the atmosphere is joyful and happy. However, it could foreshadow danger as everything seems a bit too perfect. The reader will therefore question, will life always be perfect for the three little pigs? And what could possibly go wrong? So you can see how planning and using the focus, the atmosphere, a summary, and at least two questions that the reader might have enables you to write a paragraph about what is established at the beginning of the story. Let's have a look at it on the next slide, Jamaica Inn, which is a bit more tricky. Well, we should already know about what is established at the beginning of Jamaica Inn because we answered on that in question 1 and indeed a bit on question 2. It's the weather. Remember? It was a cold, grey day in late November. The weather had changed overnight when a backing wind brought a granite sky and a mizzling rain with it. And although it was now only a little after 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the pallor of a winter evening seemed to have closed upon the hills, cloaking them in mist. It would be dark by 4. The air was clammy cold, and for all the tightly closed windows, it penetrated the interior of the coach. The leather seats felt damp to the hands, and there must have been a small crack in the roof because now and again little drops of rain fell softly through, smudging the leather and leaving a dark blue stain like a splodge of ink. Now, remember what I've said, that structure comprises of paragraphs, sentences, punctuation, and dialogue. Now, I've actually noticed that the second sentence is a complex one. We have commas being used, and it talks about how the weather's changed overnight. It lists there's a backing wind, mizzling rain, there's a mist. So weather features are being listed for us, and I can use that when I analyse this. So, what's being established at the beginning of this? Well, if I summarise it, the weather is the focus for a number of paragraphs. It's wet and miserable. It makes the conditions for travel rather dangerous. Complex sentences are used to list the effects. And the focus is on the clammy weather, and the atmosphere is miserable, cold and dangerous, which kind of brings to my mind, why would anyone be travelling in this kind of weather, and will there be a change? So, in writing this up, for about 4 or 5 marks, I'd be saying, in the beginning, the focus is on the clammy weather. This is when the weather is the focus for a number of paragraphs. It's wet and miserable. It makes the conditions for travel rather dangerous. At this point, the atmosphere is cold, miserable and dangerous. The reader will therefore question, why would anyone be travelling in this weather, and will there be a change in the weather? But we want to be going for the full 7 to 8 marks. And so you need to look at the next slide to see how I've subtly changed how I write. Now again, I've given you sentence starters. Oh, notice those ones on the left with the red X's. Do not say it makes the reader want to read on. It makes the reader want to find out more. It draws the reader in. It tells us more about the characters. No, it doesn't. It doesn't do any of that at all. That means you just don't know what to write. Let's use the sentence starters on the right. In the focus is on, or the focus shifts to, if you're looking at the development and the conclusion. This is seen when. At this point, it is inferred that the atmosphere is. The reader could therefore question. Please also note that at no point in question 3 do I analyse a particular word or a simile or a metaphor. That is not what we do in this question. We're looking at the structure. So, for 7-8 marks, in the establishing paragraphs, the focus is on the clammy cold weather. This is seen when a complex sentence is used at the beginning of the source, listing how there is a backing wind, mizzling rain, and that there is a cloaking mist. At this point, it is inferred that the atmosphere is miserable, cold, and dangerous. The reader could therefore question why anyone would be travelling in such conditions, as well as whether the weather will change. And that is how you get 7-8 marks. So now let's look at how Daphne du Maurier develops the narrative. Remember, what is established at the beginning of the text is the weather. But then there is a shift in focus. The few passengers huddled together for warmth, exclaiming in unison when the coach sank into a heavier rut than usual, and one old fellow, who had kept up a constant complaint ever since he had joined the coach at Truro, rose from his seat in a fury and, fumbling with the window sash, let the window down with a crash, bringing a shower of rain upon himself and his fellow passengers. He thrust his head out and shouted up to the driver, cursing him in a high, petulant voice for a rogue and a murderer, that they would all be dead before they reached Bodmin if he persisted in driving at breakneck speed. They had no breath left in their bodies as it was, and he, for one, would never travel by coach again. Okay, so by signalling the development, we are told about the few passengers, and in particular we're told about the old fellow. And we have indirect speech where he is shouting at the driver. What I need you to do now is, first of all, summarise what happens, write about what the focus is on, consider what you think the atmosphere is here, and the 2 questions that you might ask at this point. You now need to write your own paragraph on the development of the narrative. Remember to use our sentence starters to construct your paragraph. So you're going to talk about in the development of the narrative, the focus shifts to. Take your time. You do actually have longer than 12 minutes for you to get used to doing this. Good luck. And now we need to look at how the source concludes. Mary Yellen sat in the opposite corner where the trickle of rain oozed through the crack in the roof. Sometimes a cold drip of moisture fell upon her shoulder, which she brushed away with impatient fingers. She sat with her chin cupped in her hands, her eyes fixed on the window splashed with mud and rain, hoping with a sort of desperate interest that some ray of light would break the heavy blanket of sky, and but a momentary trace of that lost blue heaven that had mantled Helford yesterday shine for an instant as a forerunner of fortune. Now, notice here that we actually have a character named. Previously, we've had the old fellow and we've had the woman with the fat round face, if you've got the whole text in front of you. But now we have a named character. What does that infer for us about Mary Yellen? Look at how she's staring at the window. And look at the final words. That the idea that the weather would shine as a forerunner of fortune. Why might Mary Yellen want her fortune, her luck, to change? You need to now summarise, look at the focus, think about the atmosphere, and think of 2 questions you would have about the conclusion. Get that done. Thank you. So now you should be ready to write your final paragraph, which is obviously about the conclusion and what the focus has shifted to here. So, gentlemen, you now need to write that up, and you now have 3 paragraphs that should score you 7 to 8 marks for question 3. Remember, this is all about the structure. It's all about how the paragraphs establish, develop, and conclude, how our focus might shift from the weather to a group of passengers to a particular passenger. Get that written. Good luck, gentlemen.